Welcome to the TRXL podcast. I'm Evan TRXL, and in this episode, I sit down with Peter Markos. Peter has taken a different approach to practice. Instead of only delivering one-off services, he's also building a product. Beautifully designed, small vacation cabins that are meant to be repeatable, high quality, and easy to deliver. His practice blends design, manufacturing thinking, and even a smart distribution strategy that uses a flagship rental to generate demand. In our conversation, we get into what it really means to productize architecture. We talk about shifting incentives away from hours and toward outcomes, learning through rapid versioning, and why things like supply chain, tolerances, and assembly should be treated as design problems. Peter also shares how physical models can speed up decision-making and how running two flywheels, client projects alongside a product line, can make a small studio more resilient. The question I want to get the answer to is, can architects break free from the billable hour? And because Peter is actually doing it and not just talking about it, he's the perfect guest for this conversation. The big takeaway from this one is about what becomes possible when architects are willing to rethink the business model itself. Once you move beyond the old billable hours framework, whole new opportunities open up, from aligning incentives differently, to scaling through products, to creating distribution channels that compound demand. Peter shows us that designing a business model can be just as much an act of architecture as designing a project. So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Peter Markos. Peter, great to have you. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Evan. Great to be here.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in having a conversation today because a lot of times on this podcast, we're focused on tools and workflows and, the people behind those things more often than not. But a lot of times we're using tools to accomplish a certain thing within an architecture firm, an engineering firm, whatever, and there's newer, better ways of doing things, and then there's kind of culture wars, and there's a lot of different kind of politics around all of those things. And I wanted to take a different approach today and not talk about tools specifically, but this kind of goes back to an idea that Clifton Harness, a previous guest on the podcast, talked about. He's like, if you really want to change AEC, change the contracts, right? If you really want to make waves in this profession, we have to redesign some of the basic foundations, and it's not the tools, the application, the workflows, the processes, all those things can get better and do get better over time. What I want to talk to you today about is like business models and rethinking how you could practice architecture, because a lot of times I think people are stuck in firms who have an assumed business model and aren't evolving in that way. So I would love to talk to you about that today, because I know you are doing something differently. And in order to get to that point, maybe tell us kind of how you got to where you are today, where you have, or maybe a few years ago, of actually implementing a different kind of business model for an architecture practice.
Yeah, so when I was at school, and the way I sort of got into architecture, I was really into furniture design and furniture making. And I started to get quite obsessed about this idea of products and having a product. And I won some awards at school for designing and building a chair. We had like an amazing workshop there. And when the product was finished, I remember my dad was trying to encourage me to scale it and to make it into a business. And, at the time I was like 18 and wasn't really sure how I'd sort of go about doing that. So I think, looking back, probably unfortunately, I almost abandoned that. And then I went to university, studied architecture. But then I think just so I kind of cover this, but don't go on about it, I guess. I studied at university, studied architecture, which was great. But then I kind of circled back to this idea of the product, because I was following podcasts like yourself, even the Business of Architecture, some of the others, and also lots of the discourse around architecture. And it was very clear that the business model was slightly broken. And I think when you look at other business models, they have a scalability aspect to it. And there's a nothing's bespoke, really. Things can be scaled and repeated. And I started to, again, sort of circle back to this product idea. And I've always just found product designers incredibly inspiring. Equally, I find architects incredibly inspiring. But if I think more of the books I've read, it's always things to do with the likes of James Dyson, which is the Dyson vacuum cleaner, Brompton, IKEA, things like that. Um, and then I think when I was post uni, I was very keen to set up my own business. And my sort of way in, I thought, would be to almost act as an architect developer, so develop my own product. But rather than the typical architect developer model of going from, project to project and having a new series of risks and challenges, I really wanted to develop a single product, which over time would start to get better as, in theory, I get better as an architect and we find and learn better ways of doing things. So with that in mind, I developed this holiday let and this cabin, which was designed as a small place. And the idea was that when it would be done, it would be rented out to guests as a holiday let. I think as with anything in life, it was very challenging. At this point, I was sort of 25, 26. But a few years later, I did finally get there. I developed the product. I don't want to talk too much about the finance and the how I got there perspective, because I have discussed that in the past. But I think just quite briefly, the way I funded it was I quite fortunately won a competition from Airbnb. They were giving 100 people $100,000. And I actually took that money and invested it, and then in the S&P 500. And then
I'm laughing because it's like everybody would just take that money and use it, right, to do their thing. And you did something completely different with that money. That I thought just a brilliant move. What inspired you to do that? I mean, is that just your upbringing? Is that something you already knew to do, or how did that come about?
Yes, it was partly my upbringing. So I've been investing since I was like 13, which is quite weird, I guess. And I think when I say it, it probably sounds more irrational and reckless than what it was. But
no, it wasn't. It was because you didn't like take it to Vegas and put it all on red on the roulette wheel, right? That's reckless. That's super risky. But investing is like, I mean, for S&P 500 style investing, right? Like that's just pretty stable investing.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you see it like that. That's kind of the way I saw it. Was $100,000 wasn't enough to do the project, so I was in a fork in the road. Either I don't do the project, but I have the money, or if I invested it, I would potentially, it could go down in value, but I would still own an asset, a piece of the S&P 500. So it was a calculated risk. I knew there was basically a 50% chance of it working, but it did work. And essentially, I mean, I'll show you a model of it, because I've got a model. I developed the cabin as a product, and it's currently being rented out. And I think the good thing about having this as a product is the scalability side of it, because alongside this business, I do private work for clients, and that is great because you're always learning. You've always got new projects. There's always interesting bespoke challenges. But from a business scalability, unless you start to get more people, I personally think that it's quite difficult to scale, and that the main way of scaling it is additional people in order to bring in additional income. Then you take a percentage of that. The good thing with this model of having the cabin as a product is every year, all the time we work on it, we're able to, in theory, lower the construction costs as we get smarter about what is it the guests actually care about. So, for example, with the first version, I made it way bigger than it needed to be. And that had no positive impact on the ROI. It was just more space than necessary. So now it's become a lot more tighter whilst also being comfortable. And then also there's some of the more smaller things which are fairly incremental, but overall they have a big impact, such as, the actual internal fittings. What do guests actually care about? Some of our appliances at the moment are slightly messy, lots of other things which feed into that, like what type of bedding to have, what type of towels to have. And I think as you start to scale that as a business and you have 2, then 3, then 5, then 10, etc., the potential for income grows quite substantially as well, because my fixed costs stay the same whether I've got 1 or 2. For example, my accountancy fees stay the same. But I think what I find quite exciting with this model is I could have 10 cabins, but so long as I actually structure the agreements and structure the arrangements with the cleaners, for example, so that they're taking responsibility for things, I'm actually not putting more time in, whether I've got 1 or 10. And that's something I find really inspiring and interesting, because at the moment I've got some clients, and my best way of growing my income would be having more clients, but obviously more clients means more time.
Right.
And then there's always that danger that you end up in a place where you're overworked, overstressed. So that's kind of in a nutshell the approach I've taken.
So with this business model, okay, first of all, I guess I'm curious, like, you obviously worked at firms after you graduated and you got some experience working in firms. Was there anything working in other firms where it was like, this is not for me, I need to do something else? Or this was more of an exploration just on the side where this kind of started from? How did you get to the point where you actually left working firms and started your own practice?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, I always knew I wanted to have my own business from a very young age, and I was very driven by that idea, even though I don't think I had the prerequisite skills to start a business, but I was absolutely determined to have one. And when I was working in firms, I know there was always, the firm could be doing fantastic 1 month, and then next month the COO would call us all into a meeting and say, this political event has happened and we're going to have to start making redundancies. And I just saw, for certain companies, I'm not going to mention their names, but certain companies, some of the most loyal employees who've been there 20, 25 years were just let go overnight. And that wasn't necessarily the reason, but that was further affirmation, I guess, that model is just not sustainable. I think even now, my income from my private clients can be somewhat less predictable than the income from the cabin, because the income from the cabin it's consistently grown over, we've been renting it out for about 12 months, but it's consistently grown over 12 months. We've never had like a terrible month. Sure, we've had worse months than others, but it's always just been fairly consistent. And I think even with the model, it's fairly recession-proof, which we know architecture isn't, because for a lot of people, if there was a recession, they might not be able to travel. So they'd say, how do we travel without going abroad? Why don't we stay in the UK and holiday UK? So it is quite recession-proof. It does have its challenges as well, which we can get onto as well. I'm more than happy to talk about. There are certain things which I think, and not saying this is anything easy, or it's a golden ticket or anything. It's certainly got things which I think just wouldn't be a good fit for most people, and can be quite stressful as well.
Let's take a quick break from the conversation to tell you about Avail. Is your team struggling to find the BIM assets they need? Avail's content management system simplifies access to all of your firm's content in one easy-to-use platform. No matter where your files live or what type of files they are, you can easily search and access them from Avail. Now, designers can consistently find and reuse all types of content. So, what does that mean? Well, standards compliant models and drawings are easier to create. The documentation process is less chaotic. New hires are easier to onboard. Projects are delivered faster with fewer errors. You get the idea. Visit getavail.com to try Avail for free and request a free demo. That's getavail.com, GETAVAIL.com. My thanks to Avail for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. And now let's get back to the conversation. Yeah. The idea of those hurdles that you talk about, the first hurdle to me is just how do you, and you mentioned how you were able to kind of finance this first project, but that would be, I think, a big hurdle for most people, right? To do because you are basically doing architect as developer, but in a completely different way than I think what most people think when they hear those words, right? Which might be more like the Jonathan Siegel model out of La Jolla, California, where it's bigger projects. I mean, they seem to grow over time. They start small, a little bigger, but to the point where, I mean, that's also a very lucrative thing, but it takes a lot of hard work and it takes a lot of grit to actually pull that kind of a practice off. But it is also, I think, in the same theme of like you're the responsible party for this. Like you are making it happen and you are in control, but you're also at the highest risk level. But to those who are willing to take more risk, oftentimes there's more reward opportunity in those situations. And so when you say, you have one and then you have two and then you have three and your income is going up, I think what's important to say is like you own all of these right now. You have another creative way of making this happen, where from the other podcast that you were on Business of Architecture, where I heard what you talked about, which was how you worked with landowners to carve out a piece of their property and put the cabin on it and rent out and come up with a sharing, like a profit sharing agreement with them, right? Which I think is super interesting because then you don't have to own the land somewhere else and go through all of that side of things and the risk of that and the mortgage on that. I think that's also a really interesting thing that we should definitely talk about because it's not just architecture as a product that you're selling and then it's like a transaction. You're actually building relationships with landowners in the countryside who have farmland or whatever, who might have more of a destination kind of an environment for a rental like this. And so maybe you can just talk about that side of things as well, because I think that's really a creative idea when it comes to how this actually works out in the end.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think the first thing I did when I started this, I've not got the model next to me. It was quite similar to the one I showed you. When I started this, I didn't have any backlogs of projects. As I said, I kind of started it in my mid-20s. But so what I did was I built a 3D model as a 1:50 scale. And I thought that would be a really good way of approaching landowners, particularly people in agriculture who, they're not as exposed as you and I are to 3D printed models. And that was actually a really good way of winning them over to the idea and to the business, because we were able to look at it and to say, this is what it's going to look like, potentially position it here on the land. And the way we structured the agreement was something in the UK, which is called a rent to rent, which is basically I'm renting the land of them and they get, in theory, they get a higher rental yield than they would if it was just a dairy farm. And that has actually played out, I would say, because I think on average, a farm will make, I don't know the metrics in the US, but on average, a farm will make about 100, 150 pounds a year from a single acre. Because we've got this with the farm, they're making about 400, 500 pounds per month, a bit less during the winter months, from the profit share. So every time a guest comes and stays, I've got a profit share with them. So the farm takes 20% of the income. And obviously people can sort of negotiate them back themselves and think, well, how much of this business do I want to give away, etc. But all in all, it's worked really well because particularly in the UK, buying land where you can develop or put a cabin on as a starting point, you'd be looking at about £100,000. So for me, that just wasn't feasible. But I think, like I said on Ryan's podcast on the business of architecture as well, I think the key thing is to use what you've got. Anybody looking to sort of do this model, don't be too worried about what you don't have. Just use your current starting point. Perhaps what I did was I made a list of everything I needed to do to complete the project and just very logically just tried to work my way through it. But I think the other thing is when we talk about the cost, so I think I was certainly very lucky when I won the Airbnb money. I think my advice would be to anybody wanting to start a business like this or looking to start is perhaps try and build something as cheap as you can. And perhaps it's something you actually build yourself as well. So if you can do it as a self-build, you get the materials together and make some kind of small, perhaps quite unique holiday let. It might only cost you a few £1,000s, so that could be a little bit of your savings. If you can prove that model works and you start to rent it out and you're paying for the structure itself, either you could go and fund your own next project yourself or do what I'm currently doing, which is actually just getting investors involved in growing the business. So yeah, that would really be my advice to somebody who's looking to start.
Can we talk about the contrast of traditional architectural practice model in relation to kind of what you just laid out right there? Because like what the traditional one, if you were just going to go start your own practice, which, just to be clear, you are doing this also on the side because you've diversified the way that your practice works and the way that your income comes in, right? You've got these holiday rentals, but you also have custom projects that you do for clients. But if you were only focused on kind of the traditional business model of architecture, right, you would have a client. Why don't you explain it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think the first thing I started when I was in business was the cabin. So I did the cabin. I had it as a rental property, and then I started taking on private clients. So I think probably something that helped me a lot was I had that as a built piece of work, because I've since won work on the back of it. And I'd probably say most clients who come to me have seen the cabin and the cabin business and been like, oh, that's a part of the reason they end up employing me. But I think, as I can see it, the challenge with the traditional model is you get a great client, you do a great project with them, you finish the project, and then you've got to go out and look for another project again. And it's the scalability side of it, which I think is a challenge. I personally love working with clients, and I think that's something I'll always continue to do. But yeah, I think something that concerns me and perhaps concerns a lot of people is this: for all the amazing tools out there and using the use of AI and potentially how you structure your fees and how you get more efficient at doing the job, there's a law of diminishing returns with that. And there will come a point where, you're not able to scale to the same, in my view, in the same sort of extent that something like this can do, where if you get the right sort of investment, you can double your units. If you double your units, you more than double your income. So yeah, I think there's some of the differences. I'm happy to sort of talk about some of the risks and some of the because I'm really conscious of not just painting a um, rosy
Oh,
field, you know.
right. Well, before we do that, we talked a little bit about how, scale, right? Scale is the operative word here. You wanted to do something where it's like, oh yeah, a second cabin, a third cabin, a
Mhm.
fourth cabin, and your income's going up. But in a traditional architecture practice, the scale happens with employees and throughput. But then that also removes you potentially from working on the projects because then you have to work on the business and you're responsible for employees or, and just constantly working on that backlog and making sure that that's there. And if you're doing that, you can't be doing something else at the same time, right? And so I just wanted to highlight like this conscious decision and was there purpose behind that for you to stay involved in design and working on projects and staying small on purpose?
I think I don't know. I think that the smallness is come from the I guess the realities of my situation. I'm
Mm.
not massively driven to have a massive company, but I'm
Hmm.
certainly keen over the next few years to have like a small team, like 5 or 6 people. I think I mean you alluded to, for example, Jonathan.
That's still small.
That's
I
still
think that's still small.
no, it's absolutely yeah. But I think,
Right.
for example, Jonathan Siegel, both in terms of his name, his recognition, probably
Hmm.
financially as well. I think he's only got a team of about 5 or 6 people as well, and they are
It's small. Yeah.
yeah, and they're just punching well above their weight. Whereas
Hmm.
it's much harder to get that aspect of recognition. But I've talked a lot about income. I've talked a lot about scale. For me, the main motivation was this idea of developing a product and
Mm.
just over the years refining it, creating an amazing product. I think before you and I went live, we talked about some examples like Mont Blanc and the Mont Blanc fountain pen and the Porsche 911, and that's just something that's been refined for years over years and years and years, and it's now almost this perfect perennial product, uh, which almost sells itself. And I'm not sure if I'll ever get there in terms of doing that, but that's actually the aspiration to have like an amazing British brand like Brompton or Dyson or Land Rover, where people recognise the product, and
Hmm.
it's basically selling itself as well.
Yeah, the brand is really powerful. I think of designers like Dieter
Mm.
Rams. I mean, we also talked about Charles and Ray Eames, which architects, right, who also did products and film and many other things in addition to architecture, kind of, again, diversifying their practice in many different ways, but also just following their own interests, right, and developing things that they thought were very interesting, and they also happened to come up with those timeless designs along the way with like the Eames lounge chair and several other furniture pieces. It's really kind of an inspiring model as well. So yeah, let's talk about the downsides and the risk because I mean one thing that you threw in a minute ago too was that you are now entertaining or are actively working with investors, and I
Mm.
think there's probably a whole other level of risk that once you take those steps, you've built your business to a point where you can start to scale, you know, using other means as well. So yeah, let's talk about the risk side of this business.
Yeah, so the risks were so if I compare the business when I between the point of having this idea, I'm going to do this cabin and then finishing it and then renting it out, it probably took about 3 years, I'd say.
Yeah.
That was partly because that was the main part. I was doing my qualification. I was working in practice. I wasn't solely working on this at all. But it's about
Hmm.
3 years, and within that 3 year period, I wasn't sure it was going to work. I I wasn't sure was anybody when it's done, is anybody going to rent it? I wasn't sure whether we were going to come across because we were coming across certain hurdles at the time, but I wasn't sure if there'd be a planning hurdle, which means we couldn't go ahead with it. Um, and to give you some examples, when we actually finished the cabin, we had some solar panels, and somebody came along and stole all the solar panels, um, and as well as some other stuff as well. And I actually found earlier this morning. Actually, I found the insurance claim, and it ended up being like £18,000 worth of stuff. And so, I mean, I just want, that's like the thing, I just want to sort of contextualize this. I sort of woke up one day thinking, wow, we're ready to rent this. And we had £18,000 worth of stuff stolen. And we knew we were then at target. And if we were to just put the solar panels up again, they'd just get stolen again. So it's things like that, which I've got to say have been much more stressful than anything I've experienced in the architecture business.
Well, it's your skin in the game,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and that is kind of the big differentiator here.
Yeah.
Like you are ultimately responsible for almost every aspect of this project.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've got to be honest. I sometimes hear some of the architect developers. I'm not going to mention names, but some of them talk on podcasts, and I do feel they do just present the best version, i.e., how it has worked out very well for themselves. There's a really good book by James Petty called, I think it's called The Architect Developer. It's got a black cover. But there's a really good chapter in that where he actually just lists out loads of developers who it didn't work out for and people who went bankrupt, including the architect who designed Buckingham Palace in London. He actually went bankrupt doing this. So it's really not for the faint-hearted. And I think, I mean, one of the things which helped me as well was because the money came from Airbnb, that helped reduce the stress. So I think anybody thinking of doing this from their savings, I'd really say, plan to the nth degree with this. Probably don't do what I did if doing it in your mid-20s. You probably need some years of experience and working on the right type of projects to say, right, okay. Or a way around it would be to just say, you know what, I'm going to use all my own time and from £5,000 worth of materials, let's say, do this. If it doesn't work out, I've lost £5,000. But if it does work out, I've got a scalable business model. So, yeah.
Let's take a short break from the conversation to invite you to join the most influential technology leaders in the AEC industry at Confluence. Composed of in-person events and a podcast co-hosted by yours truly, Confluence is designed to foster conversations between AEC firms and technology companies so they can learn, share, and engage with each other to support industry innovation. Software company Avail, which creates content management solutions for the AEC industry, started hosting Confluence events in 2019 to understand what firms are needing, wanting, and thinking around technology. To learn more about Confluence, explore upcoming events, and listen to podcast episodes, go to confluence.getavail.com. My thanks to Confluence for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. And now, let's get back to the conversation.
Trying to think.
Or if it doesn't work out, you have an asset that you can use in some way that hopefully makes it worth the investment, right? Like if you end up building your own thing and maybe it's on your own property to do that as a starting point, right? At least you could use it for something else, hopefully. But yeah, it's not a complete waste of money at that point. So I agree. It's like you have to do your due diligence to kind of figure out what the next steps are once you build it, because a lot of people think if you build it, they will come, and it's not true, right? Like these things don't rent themselves. You've got to do all of the work and on that side of things to actually make that part happen. And there are platforms that can help make that happen, but those aren't without their own issues as well. And so you start to have to go through, the management side of and the operation side and the cleaning side and all of that side of it as well. So are you willing to become a landlord in some ways, right? That's another thing to be thinking about.
Yeah, and I think actually I don't think I've mentioned this in the past, but I think one of the reasons I got into this was when I was in my teenage years. My parents had a service accommodation business, and they were actually too busy to run it, so I took over the management of it. So that's really part, it's not just one thing, but that was part of the background as well. And I did see a lucrative income potential from that, because I I can sort of see, wow, once you have a few of these properties, in theory, you don't really have to work. Now, I mean, sort of going to my earlier point of, I actually like working on architecture projects, and I'm not just doing it for money per se. That's for me. I'm always going to do that, irrespective if financially, if I don't need to work. And I think going back to one of the other advantages with this, the scalability is, again, if you sort of set it up correctly, in terms of with your cleaners and with your the people who deal with the checkouts, for example. Now, this has taken a lot of work, but when I started doing it, started renting the cabin out, um, every guest, there may have been a problem, or there was issues to deal with, or I might have to even drive to them to see if there's because there was a problem that needed sorting. But I've started to teach certain things to the cleaning team, and they now, like, I've not been to the cabin in about 6 months, I'd say, and they're fully empowered. So they deal with everything. If there's any problems, sometimes we might have to do a video call. But I mean, obviously, we're filming this in August, and August is the busiest month of the year. I've only had to deal with like one phone call, I'd say, and everything else has been passive. So I set up automatic messages with the guests, and automatic check-ins, automatic checkouts. So yeah, that hasn't been easy, and I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a passive income, because I feel that term is slightly misleading, but it certainly has become a lot more passive in the way that it's structured.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds really interesting. Well, what other topics are in this whole thing? There is kind of a technology side to this. I mean, obviously, there's some innovation happening here with, a lot of people I think who listen to this show are working at firms who are helping make that other company more efficient, make more money, however you want to say it. And by, again, like the willingness to take on this risk also means that you're improving your own net worth by doing this, and it's not just going to some other company who, like you said earlier, you could be 20 years into it and the market shifts substantially and you're out on the street, right? So has that been empowering to you? Is that kind of been part of the thought process as well for you?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really smart point and a really good point. And that's actually something I realized in hindsight through actually working with an angel investor, which we can get on to. But I think when I started this, I did start it fairly intuitively. I started it from the intuition side of, I kind of want a product. I kind of want the serviced accommodation business. Let's just sort of get going. I think as time's gone on and I've understood models like rent to rent, and I've become maybe a bit more sharper in those areas, I'm also realizing the value of, for example, a balance sheet. So I remember once I was I was talking to my accountant about this topic, about how do you compare with the traditional architecture model. You do some work and you get paid for it, and there's little, in that sense, there's little risk. And I said to him, I'm actually thinking about abandoning this cabin model. And he was very quick to say, no, with that, you're trading time for money. And I think something else he pointed out, which was something which just didn't cross my mind, was the balance sheet side of this. So what I mean by that is, when I rent this out, we make some money and we make predictable rental income every month, which is great. But the real value of the business like this is if you have the right building warrants, the right planning permissions, if you build the structure to last, once you come to sell the business, that's where you can actually really make the money, because there are private equity who want to buy a service, luxury, unique holiday let business. And most of them don't have the design skills and those aspects of developing a business. But what they do have is money. So
Yeah.
so that's something. And yeah, I think when you compare, if you're, having additional units, but it's not just about having additional units. A lot of it, for example, the models and the form of construction, all of that also feeds into the balance sheet because it feeds into the valuation of the business. So, so yeah, every day you're working on it. So long as you're working, on the business, and you're working on the systems, and you're working on the construction process and the efficiency and reducing the construction costs, you're actually creating a business which is designed to be sold at the end.
More value.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And that automation of communications with rentals and cleanup and all of it, and empowering the cleanup team to handle those issues, all of that is playing back into this valuation conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Whereas I think, like, obviously, like you're saying, a lot of your audience are working in firms and then trying to make those more efficient. But actually, architecture firms are notorious for being very challenging for selling as well. So I've got to admit that my architecture business would have basically no value if I wanted to sell it, because there's me, and I do have a freelance team, but it's very much based on me trading time for money.
Right.
Whereas the service accommodation, the cabin, doesn't, at this stage, particularly for the built property, it doesn't require me to operate the business, which is great.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, let's talk about this new stage with taking on investors. Can you tell me about kind of the why you've decided to go that route?
Yeah, so I've got to start by saying I'm slightly limited what I can say because of the certain things on TV and things which will be released on TV and radio, etc. But essentially, I've bought on an investor, and the way they're working, the way they've been helping, is in the scalability side of this. And we've formed this idea of actually selling this as a product, i.e., through just-in-time delivery. So somebody orders one of the cabins, and we've got a contractor who builds it out for us, and we obviously deliver that to the client. And every time we get a sale, the profit which comes from that feeds back into the serviced accommodation side. So that allows us to grow our units. So let's say we sell 3 cabins, and then we'd take that money and that would fund our own holiday let business. And that's the way we start to scale it. So it's a proper business ecosystem. And I think what's quite interesting is when I first approached the investors, I approached them saying, hey, can I have, I think it was £160,000 so I could do 2 more of these cabins. And in hindsight, that wouldn't have been a very good idea, because the problem with that model is once I've done 2 more cabins, I'd actually then need to go to other investors and say, hey, can I have some more money to do another? And every time you're doing that, you're giving away more and more of the business. And it's not a proper business ecosystem. But the good thing of having it as a sellable product is you have the product, you sell it, you take that proceeds, and that feeds into the service accommodation. So it's proper what we call like a business ecosystem.
Where did that shift in thinking come from? Was that you wanted to, because you said you went to them originally asking for 160,000 to do 2 more but then you've shifted now to making it a sellable product. Where'd that idea for that shift come from? The investor? Did it come from you?
It came from the investor, to be honest.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think so. What's been really great is I've been working with them. They're financing the sale of the cabin, so they're financing a website and the marketing which comes. So once we've got a sale, and they can get us off the ground. But they actually very much came up with the strategy, and it's based on particularly one of their backgrounds is around properties. And I don't know, I know he's got 300 tenants. So he's got a business of at least over 100 properties. And I know as well that from his background that wasn't, it's not that he had the money to do that in the first instance. He used smart methods like debt financing, forms of leveraging, remortgaging, as a means to kind of grow this business. So I think that's actually just been a massive mind shift of the difference a good business education can make in terms of how you can scale a business. Because otherwise, for me, this would be really, really challenging to scale. But like I said, the credit really goes to him for that. That was his idea, and really grateful for it as well.
Hey everyone, let's take a quick break from the conversation to pay some bills around here. This episode of TRXL is brought to you by TRXL Plus members. That's right, my incredible paid supporter members are making this episode possible. Their direct support ensures that I can continue exploring the intersection of architecture, technology, and the future of design with the leading voices in our industry directly to you. So let's talk about why you might consider financially supporting the podcast too. By becoming a TRXL Plus supporter, you're not just helping sustain these conversations, you're also gaining exclusive benefits like ad-free episodes of the show and my Leadership Edge email newsletter, where I analyze episodes and deliver the insights and key takeaways right into your inbox. Your small contribution makes a huge impact. And if you've been enjoying TRXL and want to be part of the community that keeps it thriving, please consider joining today. Head on over to trxl.co and click the subscribe button either in the upper right-hand corner or at the bottom of the page, or you can visit the link that I've put into the show notes. Once again, my sincerest thanks to the TRXL Plus members who have made this episode of the podcast possible, even though they aren't even hearing this ad because theirs are ad-free. Now, let's get back to the conversation. That business education, where did you get that from? Where is that just something that you've had to seek out and find? Have you found resources that have helped you in that regard? Because a lot of architects aren't trained in that. They don't have MBAs. In addition, architecture school is probably hard enough, right? Yeah. So, like, where are you getting that information? Are you relying on the investor for that kind of information, or what can you offer to the audience?
So I would say, to be fair to myself, I'd say my understanding of business is probably better than most architects I meet and know. And my understanding, for example, the rent-to-rent model, that was me, and that was something I thought to do, and I've got, in that sense, quite a creative business approach. But at the same time, I've got nowhere near as much knowledge as the investor. Personally, that has come from, I would mainly say, books, to be honest. So certain books, podcasts, but I would say, the podcasts have played a big part, particularly things around architect developers. Some of the more known business podcasts as well have been useful. But just constant reading of books is really, really important. And also, I think it's really, I'm not sure what your thought on this is, Evan, but I do feel that too many architects, maybe it might be a UK problem, but too many architects see business as slightly cringy, unnecessary, something they don't want to engage with. I mean, I'm just quite interested. Is that what do you think about that?
I don't have a lot of experience across the industry. That hasn't been my experience. I think a lot of time, especially with the firm that I was mainly involved with for quite a long time, business was the priority. I mean, and it was the focus of the practice. And so I think the design side of the practice kind of suffered at the such a big focus on the business side, because then it was like, chasing projects for chasing projects' sake. It wasn't really an alignment of a particular set of values or anything like that. So it was like, we can do it all. We can do everything for everybody. And so in some regard, like something has to be the flexible part of the business. And in that case, it was the design side of the business was the flexible part because the business side was so strong. So That's my experience. You could be right, but I don't have a broad range of inputs to kind of weigh that statement very, very carefully.
Yeah, so yeah, that's actually really interesting. I mean, it's interesting to see. It's almost like the polar opposite, really. But I think,
I think so too. It's not like you hear a lot of architecture businesses that are really focused on the business side of things. They're focused on doing projects, I think a lot of times they say feast or famine, or it's like you live and die by the projects that you have on the boards, and the example that I come from, it wasn't like that.
well, I think what's quite. I actually don't think it's one or the other, and I personally have found that. Um, because I think I charge appropriate fees and we've got the passive income that actually opens up time and opportunity to work on the design. Because I do hope and I do think that if anybody's to look at my website, my Instagram, I think it's fairly clear I care about design and that design is a driving force. But if we were to look at the Eames couple as well, who were incredibly successful as a business, and Alva Alto as well, and Era Saarinen, some others, Jean Prouvé. They had incredibly successful business and incredibly innovative business models, particularly Eames, much more so than mine. And yet, most of us would consider them as very good designers. I think one of the things I see, which I think is concerning with the profession, I do think it's changing, and I do feel the younger generation of architects are doing better at this. Is I think particularly older architects, from my experience at university, they think that business is beneath them, and that that if you design great things, the projects will come to you, blah blah blah, and that if you talk about these things, you're kind of some kind of evil, materialistic, financially obsessed capitalist. But I am glad. I think that's really changing, and I think that's really good to see that it's changing.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Can you talk a little bit about your investors and about picking maybe the right kind of investor? Because it sounds to me like the investor that you talked about, obviously they brought a really great idea to you, and they have a network and they have experience, and I think those are all kind of endearing qualities to finding an investor. It's not just like an alternative form of a bank, right? It's really a network. It's deep connections in the industry, or maybe an adjacent industry like real estate, or I don't know. You mentioned a few other examples there, but was that part of kind of the qualification process for you, or did you just get lucky when it came to finding a good investor?
Yeah, so I think it was a bit of both. It was certainly a bit of getting a bit lucky. But yeah, I actually completely agree with what you're saying. So I think when I got the money from Airbnb, they literally just put the money in your bank, and there was no mentorship. And there was and I think, which is what's probably quite telling, 100 of us got $100,000. Only 10 or so people completed the project, and they're renting it out. Yeah. So it's not just about money. And I think, yeah, obviously money plays into this, but a success rate of 10%, clearly there are other things at play here. I think what's been really great with this investor is he is approaching this from the perspective of how we grow this business, and he's got very good experience, and he's very excited by the product. I can't get too much into exactly how I found him and all of those sorts of things, because what I would say it will come in the public domain in a few months' time. But I pitched to a few investors, and he was the main person who was interested. To be honest, there were others. The others were like, it's a bit of a risk. I mean, one of them was even like, this could either be amazing or this could be an absolute disaster. So, but I think he saw that I had a proof concept. I had a minimum viable product. I was making a pretty decent rental income. And I think he was kind of sold by those sorts of aspects as well as his experience in the scalability side. Um, so yeah, but yeah, I think I actually just to add to that point, yeah, I think if there is some way of people finding an investor and working with somebody, that it is actually just so much more than money, and it's so important to not underestimate that. It's some of them have really, really good experience, and they can
Yeah.
make you 10 times more profitable.
I'm interested. I did want to ask you how you found it, but I'm glad to know that that'll come out in the future. So we don't have to talk about that today. But I am also interested in kind of that pitch process for you, because I think, a lot of architects are used to pitching. They don't call it pitching, right? We just do design crits, or we show our presentation to our clients. And so there is like a presentation and communication aspect to it, which you are probably pretty well trained for.
Mhm.
But I bet it was also different, right? You had to probably show the numbers side of the business. But can you just kind of talk about how you built up your pitch to pitch an effective idea and land an investor?
Yeah, and this will probably come into more of the typical conversations you'll have with some of your guests. But for various reasons, the turnaround between when I was told that I was going to be pitching to investors and when I did pitch to investors was about 5 days. 3 of those days I was on a stag do. So there were
What was that? You're on a
I was
what?
on a stag do. Is that an American word?
No, what does that mean?
Oh right, okay. So a stag do is where you go with your friend who's about to be married, and you all go and
Oh,
celebrate.
okay. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. So
We call it a bachelor party here. We call it a bachelor party here. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So I had a very constrained time, but
Mm,
what I did was I put together an investor's pitch as best as I could, which was working through Google Slides and putting something together. And then I kind of fed that into Chat GPT. That helped me refine that. I obviously just gave it as much information as I could of what I was hoping to get from pitching to the investors. And on top of that, my uncle gets pitched to a lot because he's quite senior in a company. So I
mm,
pitched the idea to him,
hmm.
and he told me things to refine. And I also pitched it to a friend. But I've got to be honest. I mean, when I first pitched it to my uncle, he said, "To be honest with you, I'm very impressed, and I was expecting this to be an absolute disaster." Um, but I think the architecture training really comes into that because,
Yeah.
you know, we use, if as long as you use beautiful images, you're clear with your words, you're clear with your numbers, you don't try and make it elaborate too much. Um, I think we do have the skills for that actually. And I
Hmm.
think if we just come back to this idea we discussed at the start of the podcast, which was how when I approached the farmers, I approached them with with a model. That's exactly what I
Yeah.
did with the investors. So
Hmm.
I had this model. I went to them, and they're just much more sold by that because
Yeah.
firstly, it shows that you care because you've come with something which is physically made.
Hmm.
You've not just got some numbers in your head or a PDF or something. So it shows that you genuinely care. It's not something that I dreamt up that morning, etc. And then equally, they're able to sort of feel the model, get a sense of it. So I think all of these sorts of things, which are integral in being a good architect, actually really play into pitching as well.
Yeah. I want to share with you something that I heard at a recent conference that I was at. I was in a session, and there was kind of, individual tables working on different questions that the facilitators of the talk were having you work on. And the question was, how do you get to trust as quickly as possible
Mm.
with a client? And there was a solo architect sitting at the table, and they said, there is no question. It is with a model. It is with a physical model. The physical model when it's right here and somebody can pick it up and touch it, it automatically eases all of their fears about working with that person. That was their experience. It's like, oh, they can do this. And I thought that was so interesting because it's a psychological answer, right? It's not, I mean, in some level it's quantifiable, but because it's a physical object that somebody can pick up, they can touch, they can look through, it just builds a connection that is much more of a relationship builder. And again, it just gets rid of the fear of, can you actually pull this off? Because I'm investing all of my money into this project, right? I mean, you're talking about architecture. It's expensive. It's somebody's life savings, most likely, being put into a project. And that simple instrument, which we have been trained to do in school, maybe not anymore. I don't know. But when I went to school, it was a big deal, right? Building physical models for every single project. It doesn't have to be 3D printed, right? It could be built out of anything. It's just one of those things that just instantly builds a bridge to a client. And so I think you've brought it up twice now in this conversation, right? It's like this thing was such a big deal. And so I just wanted to really put it out there to the audience that, don't dismiss that part of the communications process, right? There's just only so much you can do on a two-dimensional screen.
100%.
Right? Yes, it can be a 3D model. You can spin around it. You can show images. You can do those things. But it doesn't speak to somebody, I think, most of the time, like a physical representation of that building.
Yeah, I actually heard Norman Foster talk about this because so in his film, I think it's called "How Much Does Your Building Weigh, Mr. Foster?"
Right.
They said that because obviously they're a practice which stays ahead of trends and changes, and they said that they were concerned as VR glasses and visuals are coming out that it would upend the use of models. But from Foster's experience of working with the likes of Steve Jobs and Tim Cook, these people are well ahead technologically, and they know how to use VR and they know how to read those things. But the thing that he finds sells the project to them as clients is the model, and it's the thing which everyone can sort of get around and gather around and believe in. And it was actually that when it came to getting the contractors, because for a contractor to tender a project, it takes them days and days to put fees together. So they don't want to just be doing it for somebody who's got their head in the clouds and isn't going to deliver on a project. And I thought with them, I was able to actually 3D print a model and post it to them. And that was just I actually found that really strengthened the relationship and made them realize, this is serious and this person's actually looking to do this.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can wrap up with just kind of talking about the actual productizing of the model. So it sounds like you're doing prefabrication. So you're doing some kind of, digital to actual fabrication modeling. Can you just talk about that process and kind of maybe some of the things that you've learned by going through that? Because traditional stick-built architecture on a site, people have been doing that forever, right? And this is, I think, something different because of it kind of goes back to the design of this cabin being a monocoque shell, and pieces get delivered and then assembled on site. Maybe talk about the fabrication side of things.
Yeah. So and again, this sort of circles back to the great thing of having a product is that the manufacturing side, the income develops, but so does the manufacturing side of it as well. So with the first version, it was a cross between cassettes, which were prefabricated. So we essentially had these blocks, and the company who built it are called Block Build. And what the blocks were OSB boards, and they were insulated, and they essentially made Lego blocks, which would make up the structure. With the first version, I'm just going to hold up the model so you can see. With the first version, we were able to make the base from these blocks, but the rest we had to make from like skinning plywood. Now,
Hmm.
that ended up being um, very time consuming for them, and very challenging and and just very difficult. Uh, Obviously, ultimately, we did end up delivering the project, but on the newer version, what we've done is developed it so the full thing is Lego blocks essentially. So the Lego blocks make the full curved structure, and then from that, we're able to clad the exterior. Um, so, and that's where the efficiency of tools come in. Because again, yeah, there's an efficiency to the product side, but of the business side. But I think now we're starting to introduce more efficient tools to make this more efficient to produce, whilst
Hmm.
also not losing the qualities and the aspects which are important to the user. And I think that point's very important as well, because you might value certain things, but ultimately it depends. Ultimately, people looking to stay in a rural location, they care about things like, is there a fire pit, or is there somewhere to walk, and um, is it warm at night? They are the things which matter.
Experience.
Absolutely.
It's an experience. Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm curious, it sounds like there's a feedback loop between you and the fabricator so that this iterative kind of process, they're informing you as much as you're kind of driving maybe the next version of your product. Is that the case?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So we get them involved. We've got them involved very, very early on. So I said,
Hmm.
so they said, we think we can do this from the cassettes entirely. And then they looked into it and they did a bit of their own R&D, research and development. Um, and then they asked me to change certain things in the design, so I did. Then I was able to send that back to them, and now they're like, right, okay, we can actually deliver this.
Nice.
And then again, that just massively drops the cost in construction. Uh, do you guys Are you familiar with? I mean, one of the most inspiring products I find is the Brompton bike. Are you familiar with that?
I have not heard. I'm a cyclist, a mountain biker. So, but I have not heard of that brand. So,
Yes, it's very different, but it's very popular in the UK. It's a British brand. They've got a foldable bike,
mm,
but it's something that they've been developing since the 1970s. And if obviously after the podcast, if you do look it up, you can see the original 1970s version, and the version today is, a country mile away. And I think what's quite interesting is it's really start over the last 5 or 10 years. It's really started to grow in popularity,
mm,
and again, I think that's what's so exciting with this product is, if done correctly, if you work on it for years and years, it could be in some decades time when you start to really reap the rewards from it.
yeah. I think something that strikes me about your design, because it's kind of this shell and this ribbed, shelled kind of structure. I mean, the monocoque name kind of, it makes it's appropriate. But when you look up tiny homes or, vacation rentals, a lot of times it's just like, oh, that looks like a glorified shed, or that's somebody's kind of ideal version of a mid-century modern, but at the most minimal, scale possible. This is entirely different, and I'm just curious how that's played into kind of your branding, but also when somebody wants to, like we talked about experience a minute ago, they want to go have an experience somewhere and they want to stay in something unique, perhaps. And I'm curious how that's played into the branding and the business side of this, if that's been a positive attribute.
Yeah, really great question, Evan, by the way. But I think uh, absolutely. So I think there is lots of businesses in, not lots, but there are a few products around Europe, particularly where there is clearly a real care for the design, and they've developed some great cabins and tiny homes. But I would say that 99% of what's on the market is fairly basic shepherd's huts.
Hmm.
But it does make a big difference. So when I can see on the numbers on Airbnb, for example, how we're doing compared to competitors. So it'll say,
Mm.
in your area, in your town, this is how well you're doing in terms of renting compared to your competitors. to be completely honest, we're doing a lot better than most of the competitors. I would say that comes down to the design and the uniqueness in the design, because what we've got, which is perhaps holding us back a little bit, is most people who have a property like this, they will meet the guests themselves and say, hey, welcome to the property. If you need anything, just let us know. Because of where I'm located, I can't do that. And obviously it's difficult to do that if you do want to scale a business as well. So that puts us on the back foot of the consumer experience. But nevertheless, we've got a really high occupancy rate and a much higher occupancy rate than competitors. And I think that's proof that design pays. And I think circling back as well, a lot of the time it's actually quite difficult to tangibly prove to clients design pays, design increases the value of your property, etc., etc. But this is a great way this is a really clear example that the more unique the design is, the more interesting the design is, the more it's a nice space to be in, the more likely guests are to book the place.
Yeah, quantifiable.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that we're missing here in this conversation? I know we didn't talk about tools. I think that doesn't really matter at this point. It's like I can tell just by looking at it kind of what kind of tools you're using. But it's one of those things where this wasn't a podcast about that. It's about something entirely different, and not just striving at efficiencies within the practice, although you are getting to the point where you are now doing that. But it was starting off with a different idea completely. And I think that there's value in that for the audience to hear. And I hope that's the main takeaway. It's like, there's other ways to do the thing that we've all trained to do. And you're a shining example of that. So I appreciate you coming on the show to share your journey.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Evan. No, I think we've covered most things, but yeah, like I think if this is something that people are really keen to do, it's or to look at an alternative business model. I would say just certainly do it with your eyes open. My concern is that there's just too much discussion about how it's so much better than the current architecture model. I think the current architecture model has its advantages, and like you've alluded to as well, once you start to actually use efficient tools, there's ways that you can certainly make that work. But yeah, I think it's just about being aware of some of those challenges as well.
Yeah, no guarantees, right? I mean, and to your credit, like, you're doing a lot of difficult work, and you're doing it yourself. So it's like there's nobody else to point the finger at when something doesn't work. So taking that responsibility. So
yeah.
I'll put links to everywhere people can get in touch with you, your website, and some of the other things that we've talked about on this podcast. But yeah, thanks for coming on the show today and talking about what you're doing.
No, thanks for having me, Evan. Really enjoyable. Thank you.